In this section, we're going to discuss the differences between metals and nonmetals. Metals have electrons that are loosely bound to their nuclei. I put this in quotation marks because we'll discuss more about what that means next week. But electrons are responsible for all of the things that you see about metals that make them different from things that are non-metals. If I asked you what was a metal and what was a non-metal, you could probably give me a pretty good idea, just based on what you know, what you've experienced. But metals have these properties because of those loosely bound and free electrons that can kind of move around in between nuclei. And this gives metals characteristics. Metals are shiny. Electrons reflect the light when the light hits it. And so metals appear shiny. They're opaque for a very similar reason. They reflect the light so you can't see through them. Light can't pass through. You can bend metals without breaking them. And you can deform them without breaking them. You can hammer them. You can turn them into wires. It's because they can hold on to each other easier because the electrons can freely move around a bit more. They're not as trapped in a solid structure. And they'll conduct heat and electricity. The electron movement is what conducts the heat, transfers the kinetic energy, and similarly, as you know, moving electrons gives rise to electricity. And so the electrons are all of the things that you see are these characteristics of these particular elements are all related to the electrons and how they're structured in those elements. And that's important because we're going to talk about how we can put all of that together and do the periodic table, into understanding how we can look at chemistry, how all of these few elements can make everything in the world. Now, all metals are solid, generally at normal temperatures, except for mercury. Mercury is a liquid at room temperature, and that's why in the past mercury has been used to make things like thermometers. They don't use it anymore because it does poison humans. Non-metals have a bit of a stronger hold on their electrons. They're a bit more tightly bound to the nucleus. That makes them very different from metals. When you hammer something that's a non-metal, it breaks. Non-metals are generally gases or liquids or soft solids. Or think of a chunk of coal. Coal is essentially carbon. If you take a chunk of coal and hit it with a hammer, it's just going to explode essentially into a bunch of tiny pieces. You couldn't turn that into a wire. And even if you could, it wouldn't conduct electricity. Okay, there are some things like carbon that you can't see through, but gases, a lot of nonmetals are not opaque. You can see through them because a lot of them are gases. And they're insulators or they're non-conductive. They don't conduct electricity. There are some elements that have characteristics of both. And you're familiar with a couple of these. These are called metalloids. Boron, carbon, silicon, germanium, arsenic, tellurium, antimony. These are used in a lot of microchips. Carbon is essentially what everything living is made out of. And they can do they can have characteristics of both and do different things depending on the situation that they're in. They're very versatile. These differences distinguish these elements in terms of what they're able to do chemically, how they can react with other atoms.